The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed a monotonous tune, a sound that usually blended into the background of Clara's weekly routine. Today, however, it felt like a low, mocking groan that echoed the turmoil brewing inside her. She stood at the checkout counter, the cashier's polite smile starting to feel like a mask for pity. The small, red machine in front of her blinked with three unforgiving words that sealed her fate. Card declined. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young cashier said, her voice soft, trying to be helpful. "Would you like to try it again? Sometimes the chip reader can be a little finicky." Clara managed a tight-lipped nod, her face flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with the store's temperature. She knew it wasn't the chip. She knew exactly what this was, or rather who this was. Mark. It had to be Mark. He was leaving for his annual golf trip this afternoon. A week-long escape with his buddies to a resort where the sun was always shining and the drinks were always cold. A trip he had been planning for months. One he spoke of as if it were a sacred pilgrimage that he was entitled to, a reward for the burdens he carried. She slid the card back into the machine, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. She entered the PIN, the 4 digits, a familiar sequence that now felt foreign, like a password to a life she was suddenly being locked out of. She held her breath, a silent, desperate plea forming in her mind, a prayer to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Please, please work. But the machine was a stubborn, unfeeling gatekeeper. Card declined. The words seemed to flash brighter this time, a neon sign broadcasting her failure to the entire world. I think there must be a problem with my bank," Clara stammered, the lie feeling clumsy and heavy on her tongue. She avoided the cashier's sympathetic eyes and refused to look at the growing line of impatient shoppers behind her. The judgment, real or imagined, was a heavy cloak on her shoulders. "I'm so sorry. I'll have to leave these things here for now." She gestured vaguely at the cart, piled high with groceries, Sophia's favorite strawberry yogurt, the ingredients for the lasagna she had promised to make this weekend, the overpriced organic milk that Mark insisted was the only kind worth drinking. Each item now felt like an accusation, a symbol of a life she could no longer afford. Abandoning the cart felt like a walk of shame, a retreat from a battle she hadn't even known she was fighting. She hurried toward the exit, her purse clutched in her hand like a useless shield. The automatic doors slid open, and the humid afternoon air hit her face, but it did little to cool the fire of humiliation burning in her cheeks. Once inside the sanctuary of her car, she finally allowed the composure she had fought so hard to maintain to crumble. The carefully constructed dam burst, and tears welled in her eyes, hot and angry. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers still shaking as she dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail, just as she had suspected it would. "Hey, you've reached Mark. I'm probably on the green, sinking a putt or enjoying the 19th hole. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." His voice was breezy, carefree, a stark contrast to the suffocating panic she was feeling in her minivan in a grocery store parking lot. She didn't leave a message. What could she possibly say? "Hi, honey. Hope you're having a great time on your boys' trip. By the way, did you decide to detonate a financial bomb in my life before you left?" The thought was so bitter it tasted like acid. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a declaration, a power play. He had done this deliberately, timed for maximum impact, ensuring he would be unreachable, miles away, when the fallout hit. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. This was his latest move in their slow, draining war of attrition. She leaned her head against the steering wheel, the plastic cool against her feverish forehead, and let out a choked sob. What was she going to do now? She had a daughter to feed, a house to run, and not a single dollar to her name. It was in that moment of absolute despair that a small voice piped up from the back seat. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Clara's head shot up. In her panic, she had completely forgotten that Sophia was there. Clara's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes meeting Sophia's in the rearview mirror. Her daughter was leaning forward, her brow furrowed with a concern that was far too old for her 10 years. A fresh wave of shame washed over Clara. Not only had Mark humiliated her, but now her distress was spilling over, staining the innocence of her child's afternoon. She was supposed to be the protector, the calm center of Sophia's world. Instead, she was a mess, falling apart over a piece of plastic. "I'm okay, sweetie," she said, her voice raspy and unconvincing even to her own ears. She quickly wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "Mom's just a little frustrated. There's a problem with the bank card, that's all. It's a silly adult thing." Sophia didn't look away. Her gaze was steady, perceptive. "You're crying, Mom." It wasn't an accusation, just a simple, heartbreaking statement of fact. The observation cut through Clara's flimsy pretense, and she felt her resolve crack again. There was no hiding it. She took a deep, shuddering breath and put the car in reverse. "You're right, honey. I'm very frustrated and a little sad. But it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out." She navigated the car out of the parking spot, her movements stiff and robotic. The drive home was shrouded in a heavy silence, thick with unspoken words. Clara's mind was a whirlwind, a chaotic storm of anger and fear. This was so much more than a canceled credit card. It was a message, loud and clear. It was Mark reminding her who held the power. He had always been the primary earner, a fact he never let her forget. He called her monthly allowance household funds, as if she were a salaried employee managing one of his departments. Anytime she pushed back on one of his decisions or questioned an expense, he would retreat behind a wall of financial jargon, making her feel small, uninformed, and dependent. "I handle the investments, Clara," he'd say with a dismissive wave. "You just tell me what you need for the groceries." She had accepted it for years, telling herself it was a fair division of labor. He earned the money, she made the home. But lately, his control had tightened into a chokehold. The arguments had become more frequent, his temper shorter. This, she realized as she turned onto their quiet suburban street, was his ultimate trump card. He hadn't just cut off her access to funds, he had cut her off at the knees, leaving her stranded and helpless while he was off playing golf. As she pulled into the driveway, the sight of their beautiful two-story house offered no comfort. It felt like a gilded cage she had willingly helped to build. The silence in the car was finally broken by Sophia, her voice now quiet, but firm. "Dad did it, didn't he?" He turned off the card. The question hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. She looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror again, truly seeing her this time. Sophia's expression wasn't one of childish curiosity. It was one of grim understanding. How much had she seen? How much had she overheard from behind her bedroom door? The thought that her daughter had been carrying the weight of their fractured marriage made Clara's heart ache with a new kind of pain. She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. She just switched off the engine. "It's okay," Sophia said again, unbuckling her seatbelt with a sense of purpose that startled Clara. "I have a backup." Clara stared at her, bewildered. "A backup? What are you talking about, honey?" "Wait here," Sophia said, hopping out of the car and running toward the house. Clara followed, her mind still trying to catch up. She walked into the cool, quiet hallway to see Sophia emerging from her bedroom, dragging her small, unicorn-themed ottoman behind her. She positioned it in the middle of the living room floor, unzipped the top, and reached inside. She pulled out a large, decorated shoebox. On the lid, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Mom's Emergency Fund." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She sank onto the sofa as Sophia lifted the lid, revealing not a collection of toys or trinkets, but stacks of neatly folded bills. 5s, 10s, 20s, all bound together with colorful rubber bands. Clara stared into the open shoebox, a treasury of childhood secrets, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air in the living room grew thick and heavy, charged with a meaning she couldn't yet comprehend. It wasn't a piggy bank filled with spare change. This was a vault. Before her lay stacks of bills, 5s, 10s, 20s, each bundle meticulously folded and held together by the bright, sparkly rubber bands Sophia used for her rainbow loom creations. The jarring contrast between the whimsical, childish fasteners and the serious adult purpose of the money created a sense of vertigo. She looked at the lid lying on the carpet, at the carefully penciled words, "Mom's Emergency Fund." A child's handwriting was defining the reality of her life. "Sophia? Where?" Clara's voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible. "Honey, how did you get all this? This is so much money." Sophia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up with an expression of profound seriousness that seemed to belong on a much older face. "It's my savings," she explained, her tone matter-of-fact, "from my birthdays. And for Christmas, when the family gives me money instead of toys. Remember Grandma gives me $20 for every A on my report card? I saved all of it." She pointed to a neat stack of 20s. "And that's from my lemonade stand last summer. And remember Mrs. Henderson's poodle, Pip? She gave me $50 for finding him when he ran into the woods." Each sentence was a small revelation, painting a picture Clara had been completely oblivious to. She had seen these events, the report cards, the lemonade stand, as simple, happy moments in a child's life. She'd praised the good grades and smiled at the entrepreneurial spirit, assuming the proceeds were spent on ice cream, movie tickets, or some fleeting trinket. The idea that Sophia had been systematically diverting every single dollar into this secret fund was staggering. It felt as if a hidden parallel life had been unfolding right beside her own. But why, sweetie? Clara's voice cracked, the question hanging in the air, heavy and fragile. Why wouldn't you spend it? On a new bike? That video game you wanted? For the first time, Sophia's confident gaze faltered. Her eyes dropped to the worn carpet, and her small fingers began to trace the outline of a flower in the pattern. "Because I heard you," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the silence of the room. "Sometimes, late at night, I heard you and Dad fighting. In your bedroom." The words struck Clara with the force of an electric shock. The arguments, the tense, whispered fights she thought had been contained, muffled by their closed door. Fights about Mark's reckless spending, about his refusal to see her as an equal partner. Fights where her voice became tight with unshed tears of frustration. She had been so consumed by her own pain that she never once considered that their poison had been seeping through the floorboards, trickling into the room below, and poisoning her daughter's peace. She could picture Sophia in her bed, clutching her stuffed unicorn, listening to the angry murmurs from upstairs. A fresh, sharp guilt, more painful than any public humiliation, pierced Clara's heart. "You sounded so sad, Mom," Sophia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "You always sounded so worried about money. So, I started the fund. I wanted to make sure you had a backup, for an emergency." She finally looked up, her brown eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. "Like today. For an emergency. Like today." The simple, devastating logic of a child who had taken it upon herself to solve a problem that was never hers to carry. Sophia hadn't just been saving money. She had been building her mother a shield. The last of Clara's strength gave way. She slid from the sofa onto the floor, the world narrowing to the small, brave face of her daughter. She wrapped her arms around Sophia, pulling her into a hug so tight it was almost desperate. She buried her face in Sophia's hair, breathing in the innocent scent of strawberry shampoo, and the tears she'd been fighting finally broke free. They were not tears of anger or shame. They were tears of profound, soul-shaking love and a deep, aching regret. In that moment, holding the evidence of her daughter's quiet strength, Clara understood. Mark hadn't left her with nothing. He had only revealed what she truly had, and it was more valuable than anything he could ever take away. Clara held the hug for a long moment, drawing strength from the small, steady frame of her daughter. When she finally pulled back, she looked at Sophia not just as her child, but as a person, a force she was only just beginning to comprehend. The tears had been washed away, and in their place was a calm, crystalline clarity. The panic that had seized her in the car felt like a distant memory from another lifetime, belonging to a different woman. The woman who had been left helpless in the grocery store parking lot was gone. In her place sat a mother whose heart had just been reforged in the fires of a child's fierce, unwavering love. She gently wiped the lingering moisture from her cheeks and looked back into the shoebox. It was more than money. It was a testament. It was years of unspoken observations, of quiet empathy, of a child's resolute decision to protect her own. "You kept this in your ottoman?" Clara asked, her voice filled with a new kind of wonder. "All this time? I've sat on that ottoman 100 times helping you with your homework. I had no idea." Sophia gave a small, proud smile. "I know. It was a good hiding spot. Dad never looks in my room. He just stands in the doorway." The simple, innocent statement landed with the weight of an anvil. He just stands in the doorway. It was true. Mark's presence in their daughter's life was often superficial. A perfunctory check-in before he retreated to his office, his phone, or the golf course. He saw a daughter he had to provide for. He had never taken the time to truly see the person she was becoming. He had no idea of the little strategist sitting before them, a girl who understood the family's fault lines better than he did. "How did you never spend any of it?" Clara pressed gently, truly needing to understand the depth of her daughter's discipline. "Not even a little? For a candy bar? For that new art set you were admiring at the craft store?" Sophia shook her head, her pigtails swishing. "Sometimes I wanted to," she admitted, her honesty unwavering. "But then I would think about the fund. I made a rule. This money isn't for wants, it's for needs. And I didn't need an art set. I knew you would get it for me for my birthday anyway. But I thought, maybe one day you might need this." She gestured to the box. "And you wouldn't be able to get it for yourself." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. A 10-year-old was explaining the difference between wants and needs, a lesson that her own husband, a man in his 40s with a portfolio of investments, had apparently never grasped. In that moment, Clara's perception of her marriage shifted irrevocably. Mark's actions were no longer just cruel, they were pathetic. His attempt to control her through finances was the desperate act of a weak man, not a strong one. He wielded money like a club because it was the only power he truly had. And faced with the quiet, formidable strength of the small girl in front of her, his power seemed like a cheap imitation of the real thing. A new resolve, cold and hard as steel, settled in Clara's chest. This was not the end. This was a beginning. She was not a victim to be rescued. She looked at Sophia, a real smile touching her lips for the first time that day. You know what, my love? You were right. Today is an emergency. And you know what we do in an emergency? Sophia's eyes widened, waiting. We use the fund, Clara declared. She reached into the box and took out a single $20 bill. The paper felt different in her hand now. It wasn't Mark's money, it wasn't an allowance. It was earned. It was saved. It was pure. First, we're going to get some groceries, but not from that store. We're going to the nice one, the one with the good bakery. And we are going to buy everything we need for our lasagna dinner. She then took out another 20. And then, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we are going to their ice cream counter. And you and I are going to order the biggest, most ridiculous sundaes they have, with extra hot fudge and whipped cream and sprinkles, because taking care of ourselves is a need too. For the first time that afternoon, Sophia's serious expression broke, and a dazzling, childish grin spread across her face. It was a sight that filled Clara's heart with more light than any sun-drenched golf course. Okay, Mom, Sophia giggled, scrambling to her feet. As they walked out the door, hand in hand, Clara felt a sense of freedom she hadn't realized she'd lost. It wasn't about the money. It was about the choice. For the first time in a long time, she was not operating on funds allocated by Mark. She was acting on a reserve of love and resilience she never knew existed. He was hundreds of miles away, confident that he had left her powerless. He had no idea that back home, his kingdom was already starting to crumble. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, triumphant scoop of a spoon into a bowl of ice cream. The automatic doors of the good grocer slid open with a gentle whoosh, and instead of institutional humming, they were greeted by the warm, inviting aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted coffee. The lighting was soft, the displays were vibrant with color, and quiet. Classical music drifted from unseen speakers. It was a world away from the harsh, sterile environment where Clara's humiliation had played out just a few hours earlier. This was a place of care and quality, and for the first time in years, Clara felt she deserved to be there. Sophia's hand was warm in hers, her steps light and bouncy. Can we get the fancy pasta, the one that looks like little bow ties? She asked, her eyes wide with excitement. We can get whatever we want, Clara said, and the words felt like a mantra. They moved through the aisles not with the rushed efficiency of a weekly chore, but with the leisurely pace of an adventure. They examined cheeses, selected a loaf of rustic garlic bread, and picked out the ripest, reddest tomatoes for the lasagna sauce. Clara found herself looking at everything through new eyes. She wasn't just a consumer, she was a provider, making deliberate choices for the well-being of her small, resilient family of two. Every item they placed in the cart felt less like an expense and more like an investment in their own happiness. At the checkout, when the total was displayed, Clara felt no flicker of anxiety. She reached into her purse and pulled out the $20 bill from Sophia's fund. She handed it to the cashier with a steady hand, a small private smile on her face. The change that came back felt solid and real. It was her change, from their money. True to her word, their next stop was the ice cream counter. Sophia, who usually agonized over her choice, confidently ordered a unicorn volcano, a mountain of strawberry ice cream, rainbow sprinkles, marshmallow sauce, and a cloud of whipped cream, all topped with a sugar cone horn. Clara, feeling a surge of joyful rebellion, ordered a triple dark chocolate avalanche. They sat at a small table by the window, their spoons clinking against the glass bowls. This is the best emergency ever, Sophia declared, a dab of whipped cream on her nose. Clara laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that felt like it came from deep within her soul. I agree, she said, savoring a spoonful of rich, dark chocolate. As she watched her daughter, lost in the simple, pure bliss of a giant ice cream sundae, the steel in her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This joy, this peace on her daughter's face, this was the new baseline. This was non-negotiable. The drive home was filled with happy chatter, and when they walked back into the house, it no longer felt like a gilded cage. It felt like their space. That evening, as the rich aroma of lasagna filled the kitchen, Clara found her mind working with a clarity it hadn't possessed in years. The emergency fund sat on the coffee table, a quiet sentinel. After Sophia was asleep, Clara sat down on the sofa, pulled the box toward her, and for the first time, did a proper accounting. She carefully unfastened each rubber band and laid the bills out on the table, sorting them by denomination. The final tally was far more than she had imagined: $2,457. It was an astonishing sum, a testament to her daughter's incredible foresight and sacrifice. But as she looked at it, she also understood a stark reality. It was a lifeline, not a permanent solution. It was a bridge, and she had to use it to get to solid ground. What was her ground? She closed her eyes, pushing past the last decade of being Mark's wife. Who was she before? She was Clara Davison, a bright art student who had graduated with honors in graphic design. She had been good, too. She had a keen eye for color and a knack for creating clean, elegant logos. She'd had a job at a small but respected boutique firm downtown. She'd loved the challenge, the creativity, the collaboration. Then she had met Mark, fallen in love, gotten married. When Sophia came, it had seemed natural for her to stay home. "You don't need to work," he'd said. "I've got it covered." She had let that part of herself go dormant, believing it was the right choice for her family. Now she saw it for what it was. She hadn't just given up a job, she'd given up her independence. With a surge of purpose, she walked over to the built-in desk in the corner of the living room, the one Mark used for his bills, and opened her laptop. The screen flickered to life, illuminating her determined face in the dim light. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing words she hadn't touched in a decade. Graphic design portfolio examples, online digital art courses, freelance design platforms. She clicked link after link, a new world of possibilities opening up before her. The industry had changed, but the principles were the same. The tools were different, but she was a fast learner. For hours, she read, she researched, she planned. Mark was on a golf course somewhere, sleeping soundly in the belief that he had rendered her helpless. He had no idea that in the quiet of their home, his wife was not just surviving. She was meticulously planning her own declaration of independence. The shoebox was her startup capital. Her mind was her business plan. And this was just the beginning.